Good afternoon. My name is Zoey Black. I am the National Advocacy Officer in Legal and Education for an organization called Gender Dynamics. And Gender Dynamics is a non-profit organization that works to champion the rights of trans and gender diverse persons in Southern Africa and globally. Today is Human Rights Day, and we take a moment to recognize where we have come as a country. We recognize the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that gives every citizen in this country access to fundamental basic human rights. We also take the time to pay homage to the events that happened in Sharpeville in 1960, and we also recognize every single person who has worked in building a free and fair and just society in terms of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. While we have a constitution that is extremely progressive, one of the things that we as South Africans know is that sometimes the translation of those rights on paper doesn't necessarily play that way out in our everyday working lives for South Africans. And so there are profound gaps in both legislation and in our social context where people are barred from accessing and living those rights. Now, trans and gender diverse persons are an extremely vulnerable group. We often struggle in a number of areas to access our basic human rights, such as dignity, our access to healthcare, our access to freedom of movement. And so these issues become very much at the forefront of the conversation, particularly when we're talking about human rights on Human Rights Day. And I think there needs to be a greater degree of responsibility, both on government and socially, in bringing awareness to and giving living rise to the rights in the Constitution. In the midst of COVID-19, it has been an extraordinary time of reflection in terms of where we are as a society, and it is pointed out that there are major gaps in our health system and major gaps in vulnerable groups accessing that health. While certain people are able to self-isolate and protect themselves on a number of levels, those who are less fortunate are struggling to do so, like the access to proper basic healthcare services. Some people are also homeless, particularly in the trans community, where people have been abandoned by their families. It is very difficult for them to self-isolate in that kind of context. So while we are reflecting on our Constitution and reflecting and celebrating this day, I think it is important for every person to take a moment of pause and consider where we are for those who do not have what we have. And this is both broadly on a legislative level in terms of policies and how those things are giving effect to the rights of marginalized groups, but also more broadly socially, in terms of how we engage with people, how we interact with one another when we go to the shop, when we are in our circle of friends, how we talk about other people. And I think if we start at home and start in our basic social context, that will give breath and life to those rights enshrined in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. I hope everybody is safe in their spaces amidst this global disaster that is happening. Stay safe, wash your hands, and be safe, and take care of your loved ones.